Another challenge, I would say, to understanding LOAC and adherence to LOAC, in my view, is the proximity of staff officers and operational commanders to legal advisors. So from my own anecdotal experience with LOAC training in the region, it often appears that military lawyers are relegated to military justice roles and are not actually there at the coalface providing operational legal advice in a deployed environment in the same way that the Australian Defence Force has integrated legal advice. This means not only that some regional military lawyers may be inexperienced in advising on operations law, but also that operational commanders are not used to incorporating legal advice into operational planning and decision making. And furthermore, if military lawyers are principally involved with military prosecutions for breaches of the law, then you can often see a lack of trust and confidence can hamper efforts to incorporate operational legal advice into operational planning and decision making. So in our training, we really try to promote the organisational construct of embedding operational legal advisors into military planning exercises and deployments, and of operational commanders actively and regularly seeking out legal advice. When we are delivering our training in countries through the Indo-Pacific region with our mobile training teams, we do work closely with the relevant country's JAG service on various capacity building efforts and use a sort of train the trainer approach to empower their military lawyers to be more involved, engaged and integrated in the provision of operational legal advice and training. So in my experience, the IPCML's general LOAC training is often one of the only comprehensive sources of external training that some military officers in the region are receiving. And in that regard, we're sort of fortunate to have the budget allocation from our International Policy Division under the Defence Cooperation Programme to sponsor that.
Mm. Tell me, Grace, when they, you made a point about emphasising the role of lawyers and access to legal advice, particularly in the context of LOAC. Do you think that when officers leave your courses, that they leave with a newfound sense of obligation or sense of acknowledgement that that legal advice in this area of law should matter more in their planning?
I would like to think so. That's certainly what we're hoping to achieve. And I think in a way we have demystified that. We have come across as approachable and accessible, and hopefully demonstrated that lawyers are not there to impose restrictions or to constrict capability, but to enable.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think another challenge that we do have as LOAC trainers is sometimes the skepticism from the student body of commanders or operators about engaging lawyers due to their belief that it really will only serve to inhibit their efforts.
Yeah.
And there can also be a little bit of reticence, particularly I would say when students open up a little bit more when we are in their country as a mobile training team around compliance when dealing with non-state actors, particularly terrorist insurgency groups,
yeah,
who flout international law and violate LOAC, and who also then sort of, in their view, serve to exploit human rights bodies in order to prosecute perceived human rights breaches.
Yeah.
So that is a challenge to continue to convey the importance of compliance when it seems as though the other side is perhaps not complying.
Yeah, no, it's a classic dilemma, isn't it? A classic challenge. And finally, Grace, my final question is your thoughts on the potential and pitfalls of state reporting on military LOAC training. Do you have a view about that? What might be positive or negative in such reporting?
Well, I'll just speak from the IPCML's perspective, and that is that we do complete our own post-course reporting anyway. So that is something that happens, internally for our own internal consumption, and we record the attendance of defence personnel as well. And this all assists us in our compliance with the dissemination of LOAC obligations and requirements at both an international and domestic level, whilst also supporting preparations for our own operational readiness. So we do record foreign students' details, their attendance on IPCML databases, and as I said, students are given access to the Australian Defence Education and Learning environment for accessing courseware, but we don't formally report on this sort of general LOAC training delivered to foreign members of armed forces, to my knowledge. So I don't have a specific view on that, but what I would say is that I even in the absence of a formal reporting mechanism, I do hear echoes back, anecdotal echoes back of the positive effects that this is happening. So that informal reporting is good to stay tuned into. And I'll give you one example of that, if you will allow me, Dale. So as you may be aware, we have conducted extensive LOAC training with the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and indeed the whole of Defence has increased its investment and commitments in Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines, following the 2017 siege of Marawi in Mindanao. And many members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines have received training by the ADF since that time, including the general LOAC training that we provide, obviously both at our facility here in Sydney and by our mobile training teams, which deploy to Manila twice a year. And to really highlight the significance of this training effort to our broader international engagement objectives, an article was actually written by the Australian Institute of International Affairs on their blog earlier this year, authored by the head of delegation of the International Committee of the Red Cross in the Philippines, who is also the regional director for Asia and Pacific. And that article looked at how states can engage responsibly, how they can engage responsibly in conflict-related support, with using the shared experience of Australia's supportive relationship with the Philippines as sort of case in point. And that specifically referenced the operations law training that we deliver in the Philippines twice a year on a command and staff operations law course, which forms part of the Philippines Command and General Staff College. So in my view, that was sort of a concrete example of how Australia is directly and responsibly engaging in conflict-related support by way of general LOAC training and education through our enhanced presence in the region, and sort of goes back to the original stated purpose of this centre.
Oh, thank you. And Grace, thank you for this conversation, and I wish you all the best with your valuable work with the IPCML.
Thank you.